The sea had finally released them. What returned to the north was not a victorious fleet, not heroes welcomed by songs, not men drunk on gold and glory. What returned were survivors, scarred, hardened, reshaped by the edge of the world itself. Bjorn Ironside stood on northern soil again, but the man who returned was no longer the son of Ragnar chasing horizons. He had crossed the limits of the known world. He had faced organized armies, fortified cities, disciplined fleets, and fire at sea. He had lost nearly half his men, and he had learned. This was no longer an age of wandering. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. In the years following the Mediterranean expedition, around 862 to 865 AD, the Viking world began to change. Raids were no longer enough. Short voyages no longer satisfied men who had tasted empire-level resistance and survived it. Power was no longer measured by how far you could sail, but by how much land, loyalty, and fear you could command. Bjorn understood this before anyone else. He did not celebrate his return. He did not boast. He watched. Across Scandinavia, in modern-day Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, whispers spread. The sons of Ragnar were no longer united by legacy alone. Each carried ambition. Each carried followers. Each carried a claim. Ivar the Boneless ruled through terror and calculation. Halfdan Ragnarsson sought crowns across England, a balanced faith, war, and diplomacy. And Bjorn Ironside. Bjorn prepared for something darker. He was no longer preparing to raid foreign lands. He was preparing to fight Vikings. Experience had returned with him, sharper than any blade. Experience forged in storms, betrayal, siege, and mass death. Experience that taught him one brutal truth. The next wars would not be against monks, towns, or kings who fled at the sight of axes. They would be against men who fought the same way he did. The North felt it before it saw it. War bands gathered. Longships were rebuilt not for speed, but for endurance. Shields were reinforced. Weapons standardized. Veterans from Iberia and Italy became instructors, teaching formations, discipline, and restraint, concepts once foreign to Viking warfare. This was no longer chaos. This was preparation. Bjorn Ironside did not seek a crown yet. He sought something more essential: control. Because in the Viking world, leadership was never inherited peacefully. It was taken, and the wars that were coming would decide, not just who ruled, but what Vikings would become. The age of raiders was ending. The age of kings was about to be forged in blood. Phase 2. Silence of the North. The council that forged a civil war. They expected songs. They expected the old ritual. The shoreline crowded, horns lifted, women laughing, children running, jarls pretending unity while calculating the next voyage. Instead, the North met them with silence. The longships that returned between roughly 862 and 865 AD were fewer than the men remembered. Torn sails, salt-burned rope, hulls darkened where fire had kissed the wood. Veterans stepped onto the shore like ghosts who refused to die, leaner, quieter, heavier in the eyes. Not the swagger of raiders, but the stillness of men who had watched an entire fleet vanish and kept breathing. And that silence spread faster than any rumor. Along the coasts and inland lakes of Scandinavia, what is now Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, people counted faces more than they counted treasure. They noticed missing brothers, missing fathers, missing leaders, and the most dangerous question began to form in every settlement. If half the fleet could burn in foreign waters, what could happen here, at home, where the enemy speaks your language and fights your way? Bjorn Ironside did not return like a prince. He returned like a commander. He didn't climb a rock to boast. He didn't raise an axe to promise another aid. He didn't feed the crowd with legend. He let them stare at the survivors, at the torn banners, at the scars that made bragging feel childish. Then he moved. Quietly, methodically, he began pulling the North into order. Not by declaring a crown yet, by controlling the things that create crowns. Ports, supplies, loyalty, fear. First came the veterans. Men who had crossed the Bay of Biscay, tasted the coasts of Iberia, seen walls in Italy, watched fire on water. These were not seasonal raiders anymore. These were campaign men. Bjorn placed them in key crews, key camps, key routes. He turned survivors into instructors, teaching formation, discipline, watch rotations, signals, and restraint. In the old Viking world, rage was admired. Bjorn taught something more frightening. Rage wins a moment. Discipline wins a kingdom. Local jarls felt the shift immediately. Some tried to contain it. They blocked access to harbors. They delayed trade. They tightened control of inland routes. They invited Bjorn to feasts with smiles too sharp to trust, hoping to drown him in politics before he could reorganize the war bands. Others tried a softer blade. They offered alliances through marriage. In the north, marriage was never only love. It was borders, ships, and bloodlines. A daughter offered to Bjorn meant share command. A sister offered meant share territory. A widow offered meant inherit a claim without drawing a sword. Bjorn listened. He watched. He refused. Not because women held no power, because they held too much power. A political marriage would bind him to a single faction when the entire North was about to split. He needed freedom. He needed leverage. He needed to look like a man who could not be owned. Still, the human side of war followed him. In every camp there were women with grief in their eyes, women who had lost men to the sea, women who watched Bjorn with a mix of fear and fascination because he returned from a journey others barely understood. Some sought protection. Some sought influence. Some sought revenge against jarls who sent their husbands to die. Bjorn learned quickly. The next war would not begin with axes. It would begin with whispers. And then came the thing, the council. Phase 3. The war that broke the north from within. The council ended, but the war had already begun. Between 865 and 870 AD, Scandinavia did not fall into chaos overnight. It decomposed slowly, deliberately, like a wound left untreated. No banners were raised. No declarations were shouted. The north turned on itself in silence. Ships began to burn in isolated coves under cover of darkness. Supply wagons vanished along frozen inland routes. Messengers were found days later in forests and marshlands, their throats cut, their messages never delivered. Every death carried a warning. Every warning carried fear. Bjorn Ironside did not strike first. He let uncertainty do the work. Local jarls tested one another cautiously, probing borders, denying harbor access, tightening control over winter supplies. Skirmishes erupted and were buried under lies, blamed on storms, accidents, misunderstandings. But everyone understood the truth. This was no longer preparation for foreign raids. This was internal war. Bjorn's veterans moved differently from the rest of the north. These were men who had crossed the Bay of Biscay, survived the disciplined armies of Al-Andalus, breached Italian cities, and escaped fire ships in the Strait of Gibraltar. They no longer fought with instinct alone. They fought with memory. Shield walls were drilled without shouting. Signals replaced screams. Formations shifted with precision. Supplies were guarded like weapons. Bjorn was not gathering warriors. He was constructing an army. The first open confrontation came near the strategic waters of eastern Sweden, close to modern-day Lake Mälaren. Control of this region meant access to inland trade routes, food stores, and winter movement. Whoever held Mälaren controlled the heart of the north. Two rival factions arrived under the pretense of negotiation. Steel answered before words. Shield walls slammed together with brutal force. Spears punched forward, driving into wood and flesh. Axes rose and fell in disciplined arcs. Mud, blood, and shattered shields churned beneath hundreds of boots. This was not the chaos of a raid. This was organized slaughter. Bjorn's veterans anchored the center, absorbing the impact without breaking. Younger warriors moved along the flanks, cutting exposed sides. When the opposing jarl attempted a reckless charge, Bjorn signaled with a single motion. The line rotated. The enemy formation collapsed inward. Panic spread. The rival banner fell. The jarl was wounded and dragged from the field. His warriors broke and fled into the surrounding forests. By nightfall, the harbor belonged to Bjorn. The dead lay uncounted. Word traveled faster than the blood dried. Across the north, Jarls understood what had changed. This was no warband seeking fame. This was a force that punished mistakes, exploited discipline, and showed no hesitation. Bjorn Ironside was no longer a returning explorer. He was a threat to every claim of authority. Phase 4. When silence turned into slaughter. The first real blood did not fall on a battlefield. It fell on frozen ground, between villages that once traded together. Between 865 and 870 AD, Scandinavia did not explode into chaos. It rotted into it. Winter became a weapon. Bjorn Ironside understood this before any blade was raised. He did not rush. He did not raid. He waited. While rival jarls argued over borders, Bjorn tightened supply lines. Grain wagons disappeared. Timber shipments burned at night. Harbor chains were raised, then denied. Longships were trapped in ice with no crews willing to sail them. Men began to starve quietly. Skirmishes followed, never announced, never claimed. A patrol vanished in a forest and was blamed on wolves. A hunting party was found days later beneath snowdrifts, throats cut clean, weapons untouched. No banners were taken. No oaths were shouted. Each killing was explained away as accident, storm, or misunderstanding. But the pattern was clear. Bjorn's veterans moved first. Men who had survived the Mediterranean, who had learned discipline under foreign walls. They did not charge. They positioned. Shield walls were drilled in silence. Signals replaced screams. Axes were sharpened for precision, not rage. Younger warriors were held back. Bjorn would not let bloodlust decide this war. When open battle finally came, it came suddenly. Near frozen rivers and narrow valleys, Bjorn's enemies advanced thinking they would face scattered resistance. Instead, they struck a wall. Shields locked. Spears angled. The first charge shattered. The second drowned in mud and blood. Men slipped, fell, were trampled beneath their own kin. This was not chaos. This was organization. Bjorn's center held firm, absorbing impact without breaking. Flanks closed inward, folding the enemy like wet leather. Axes rose and fell without shouting. Faces were calm, eyes focused. Killing became routine. By dusk, the ground was unrecognizable. Broken shields, split helmets, frozen corpses stacked where they fell. Ravens arrived before the last screams ended. No victory cries followed. Bjorn walked the field in silence, stepping over bodies, measuring losses. He did not celebrate. He did not pray. He remembered. Every mistake, every death, every weakness exposed. This war was no longer about land. It was about survival. Those who surrendered were spared, then stripped of weapons, leaders removed, loyalty shattered. Villages were left standing but empty of power. Bjorn did not burn the north. He restructured it. By the end of that winter, resistance collapsed not from defeat, but from exhaustion. The north did not kneel. It simply stopped fighting. Bjorn Ironside had not conquered Scandinavia through legend or fury. He had done it through pressure, patience, and memory. And the North would never fight the same way again. Phase 5. The battle that forged kings c. 870 AD. Between 869 and 872 AD, the silent war that had bled Scandinavia in shadows finally surfaced into open violence. It did not begin with banners or horns. It began with movement. Entire clans relocated overnight. Farms were emptied. Longhouses burned not in celebration, but denial, scorched so no enemy could winter inside them. Bjorn Ironside chose the ground carefully. He avoided open plains where numbers mattered. He drew his enemies toward frozen river crossings, narrow valleys, and forest corridors where formations broke and panic spread. Winter was no longer weather. It was a weapon. The first open clash came near a frozen tributary feeding Lake Melleran, sometime in late winter, when ice still carried weight but cracked under stress. Bjorn's scouts had measured it for days. His enemies had not. When the opposing warband advanced in mass, Bjorn allowed them to commit fully, shields tight, confidence high, before signaling withdrawal. They followed. The ice did not break all at once. It fractured in lines. Men fell. Shields vanished beneath black water. Those who survived the crossing emerged disordered, soaked, slowed, terrified. That was when Bjorn's veterans struck. Not screaming, not charging, but stepping forward in disciplined blocks. Axes targeted legs. Spears aimed low. Shields pressed forward until men drowned standing. No pursuit followed. Bjorn let survivors flee. Fear was more valuable than bodies. By 870 AD, the pattern repeated across central Scandinavia. Enemy supply routes were cut weeks before battles occurred. Grain stores disappeared. Livestock was slaughtered silently at night. Messengers were intercepted, questioned, and released with altered instructions. Entire clans arrived at battlefields days late, starving, exhausted, already defeated. Bjorn's army had changed. Younger warriors were no longer unleashed at the front. They were held in reserve. Veterans, men who had survived Sicily, Iberia, and Italy, formed the core. They fought with memory, not instinct. Shield walls rotated. Lines withdrew deliberately to draw enemies forward. Traps replaced bravery. The decisive confrontation came in early spring, around 872 AD, near a narrow valley road used for seasonal trade. Bjorn allowed the enemy coalition to believe they had forced him into retreat. They advanced aggressively, shouting now, sensing victory. That noise was their mistake. Bjorn's flanks closed first. Archers hidden among trees fired downward at faces and legs. The road clogged with fallen men and shattered shields. When the center engaged, Bjorn himself advanced with the veterans, shields locked, axes short, movements precise. There was no chaos, only compression. Men suffocated inside armor. Blood froze on iron. Orders were never shouted, only passed hand to hand. When resistance collapsed, Bjorn ordered the killing stopped. Leaders were captured, survivors disarmed and sent home alive. The end of wandering, the birth of a king. The sea did not greet him as a conqueror. It greeted him as a survivor. When Bjorn Ironside finally returned north after the Mediterranean catastrophe, the Viking world barely recognized him. The fleet that had left with more than 60 longships came back broken, scattered, scarred by fire and loss. Hundreds of warriors were gone. Entire crews had vanished in flames near the Strait of Gibraltar. The journey that was meant to reshape Viking destiny had nearly erased it. But Bjorn was alive, and that changed everything. Between 862 and 865 AD, Scandinavia stood at a crossroads. The old way of Viking life, seasonal raids, fast strikes, endless wandering, was collapsing under its own weight. Too many sons, too many jarls, too many blades competing for the same glory. Power was no longer decided only at sea. It was being decided at home. Bjorn understood this before anyone else. He did not return to boast. He returned to rule. Settling in central Sweden, around the Lake Mälaren region, Bjorn began transforming himself from expedition commander into territorial ruler. This land, fertile, strategic, protected by waterways, would later become the heart of the Swedish kingdom. Archaeological and saga traditions link Bjorn directly to the founding of the Munso dynasty, one of the earliest royal lines in Sweden. This was no coincidence. Bjorn had learned something vital in the south. A king without land is only a raider with a crown. He consolidated power not through chaos, but through control. Veteran warriors from the Mediterranean expedition became his inner circle, men loyal not to Ragnar's memory, but to Bjorn's leadership. Fortified settlements rose. Trade routes were secured. River access was guarded. Bjorn did not abandon violence, but he used it with precision. Around this time, the Viking world exploded into civil fractures. Ragnar Lothbrok was dead. His sons were divided. Ivar the Boneless ruled through fear and calculation in the British Isles. Halfdan Ragnarsson fought to dominate Northumbria. Ubba pushed westward. Each brother chased his own legend. Bjorn chose something different. He stayed, and by staying, he won. Unlike his brothers, Bjorn did not die on foreign soil. He did not vanish into enemy chronicles. He became something rarer, a Viking who outlived the age of pure raiding.